pillows on our laps.
Nice, actually.
Actually, right, yeah. I'm doing the trick. When you watch, it's more network television and not so much Netflix or stuff, but anytime an actor is pregnant, like in real life and they're not supposed to be on the show, they do the pillow thing where they have an oversized bag that they carry around everywhere, or like they have their charts in front of them, or like standing behind a fern or something.
Today our pillows are on our laps. So I don't flash everyone on YouTube.
And me, just because I have a little.
And Ralph wants to feel more comfortable in himself in his fupa. I don't think that's okay. Can we say that? Is that what we're saying? No.
You can't. Look it up. You don't have to. We're not going to say it.
No, we're not.
No, this is
inappropriate for this professional.
This is a family. This is a family podcast. Even though
I love your laugh.
My Sylvester laugh.
Right, fixing my hair, Ralph. We're doing all kinds of things.
Should have done that before we started.
I know. Sorry. All right.
So as I was saying before we started, on the ongoing saga of my fight with the South Philly squirrels.
Yes.
They've taken the fight to a new level and killed one of my ivies. They bit it off at the root. So now I have to go buy another one.
Those are not.
That's obnoxious. And I've started, anybody who's thinking, oh, just get the chicken wire. I've started to put chicken wire on, but I didn't get to that one, and I think they know that I'm on to them.
That's why they went in for the
They're
root.
retaliating. Yeah. They're retaliating. So if anybody who's listening is a squirrel psychologist, shoot us an email. Let me know if I can.
If you had an email about that, I would really
wage psychological warfare on these squirrels, because they really are. They're city squirrels. They know what they're doing. They're very smart. They retaliate. Like we found poop on our cushions and half-eaten nuts, in very strategic places. It's like finding a horse head in your bed. It's like the Godfather thing, but with squirrels. It just half-eaten nuts.
I told you, put a no squirrel crossing sign.
That's a good idea. I have not thought about that. Maybe they just don't know the terms of engagement. So I would put up a sign.
That would be really funny.
No
that would be funny
allowed.
If all the squirrels stopped coming. And we're like, oh my god, squirrels can read.
They also they're not scared of you. Like Dan will go out on the back deck to smoke, or I'll go out there to check on the plants or water them or whatever, just sit and relax. And they'll be out there and they'll just watch us, and they won't run away. They don't.
That though.
They just stand there and look at you. It's a little bit terrifying.
Like a happy face?
No,
or
like a little
scary?
squirrel face, little nasty little squirrel face. And I know people think squirrels are very cute, and yes, they're very cute, but also they're not eating your plants.
No.
So miss me with that noise.
It's like the bunnies down at the pool. They come right. They don't destroy things, but they come right up. They're not afraid.
Mm-hmm.
There's a little baby one like this big. It was 2 feet away from me last week, and I sat there and stared at him until he saw me, and then he popped off to his mom.
I hope everybody can hear us over the air conditioning. It's fine.
Oh, I forgot.
That's all right. We'll try it soon.
Can you hear us now?
Can you hear us now? We'll just talk a little louder. It's okay. It's hot here.
It's either that or we're gonna melt, and there'll be a lot of sweating. I already showered twice, so we're not doing that.
While we were on, I was just up in the Finger Lakes last week in New York, which is beautiful. Please go visit it if you can. We were sitting behind. We went to a vineyard and a distillery and a brewery. I didn't realize a ton of vineyards up around the Finger Lakes.
Yeah, I knew that. I don't think we went to any when I was there.
So we were doing a little mini tour, and we were at a brewery, and we were sitting in Adirondack chairs in their backyard. And we were talking out of nowhere, this little wild bunny. We were far away from the road. Comes out of the bushes on the road, runs full tilt up to me, stops, looks me in the eyes, is breathless, and is looking at me, and then runs away into the bushes. And I'm like, did he just telepathically scream for help?
I think it was somebody from the other side.
Somebody was telling me something.
It's my bird story, real fast.
Yeah.
A few years ago, I was at the pool in New Jersey with my brother and his family, and I'm sitting in the chair, and no joke, this little bird, look like a little sparrow, just your regular little bird, like flies up and hops right on the arm of the chair.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm right there. It's on the arm of the chair, which I thought was very strange, right? That's already weird. Then the bird proceeds to hop on my lap. No joke.
What?
Yeah. I'm like, there's a wild bird on my lap. I wasn't scared. I was mesmerized. I thought it was awesome. Then the bird let me pet it.
Whoa.
No way.
No.
All was probably about 30 seconds, and after I pet it for a little while, it just flew away. And in my brain, because this is me, I'm like, somebody just came to me. Like, there's no way that was just random, that the bird would hop on my lap and let me pet it.
I believe that too. I believe people come back and visit you. But who did I know that would just come up and breathlessly stare at me for 30 seconds?
I don't know, Ralph. I don't know that one.
Use your words.
Yeah. I am representing.
Did somebody need help? It was like last
Like a charade of some sort where I can take some guesses.
I don't have time for this, Bunny. Just tell me what you need. I'm very busy.
Yeah.
Even when I'm on vacation. Speaking of miscommunication.
Oh,
see
there
how I
you
did
go.
that again?
Never lets us down. Never.
I'm good at this. I should teach a class on segues into another topic. Today, our question for Hey, Let Me Ask You Something is about talking to people about conversations, but specifically why do hard conversations end up being so difficult?
Right, and scary.
Why does everything turn into an argument? Especially if it's a tough topic, especially right now, the way the world is. Like I think it's harder for everybody to have a conversation, like a level-headed conversation, and not devolve into hysterics and emotion. I mean, we're human beings, it's natural, we're all going through some S word, so I get it, but it doesn't have to be that way. So I think that's the question for today, is why do hard conversations always end up as arguments?
Yeah, it made me think of last week a little bit when we were talking about the piece on why are people so angry and nasty. Yeah. And if you just watch it, like I saw today, like you see it every day downtown. Mm-hmm. Someone's just yelling at someone crossing the street or laying on their horn, or now that's a little bit different, but for whatever reason my brain went there. But just like why people can't manage their emotions and communicate them effectively because that person that's that upset about that is going home to somebody, is going to interact with somebody, so it is kind of relevant in a way.
Right. And the traffic thing, that we could have a whole hour-long discussion about road rage and traffic. Yeah, that's just ridiculous to begin with. But yeah, you don't really know what somebody's going through, especially like if I'm sitting behind somebody in traffic and they're not moving, or the light turned green and they're not paying attention. Like, yes, it's annoying, but I'm not going to lay on my horn immediately. I'll give them a chance to be like, maybe they were checking a text or maybe listening to the radio or whatever. But it's very easy to take a breath and be like, I'm going to see what they do. It's okay.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't think a lot of us can do that.
Yeah, or we don't. Because that's a big part of effectively communicating, especially around difficult topics, which is taking a beat, taking a breath. Maybe we need to calm down before we communicate about this thing. Because maybe we're our emotions are high and we're not going to communicate the best way. And I think that's often what trips us up, is people feeling so strongly in that moment and their emotions are so high, and then we don't communicate effectively. Right.
So why not just wait until your emotions subside?
I think it takes a lot of self-awareness. I mean, you have to be paying attention to it. I don't know that everybody's doing that. You have to be aware of your emotions. You have to be self-aware of how you're feeling. You have to have practiced that, I think, to be able to come to a place where you know that you need to step away for a minute. I think the hard part sometimes is sometimes people can pick up, not quickly, but people can get with, okay, you're right, that makes a lot of sense. I should step away if I'm really upset before I say something I regret or it turns into an argument. But the problem is, not the problem, the tough part is when you step away, reconvening and addressing the issue. Because
that's in the textbook.
When you don't get anywhere. So let's say you get into a quick, snippy, snappy, angry exchange and you realize, oh, I should walk away. And you do. Well, it's important to come back. It's important to kind of figure out how you're feeling and then come back and have a conversation when both of you are calm.
And I can already hear in my head somebody, if I'm like, you know what, I need to walk away for a second and regroup and take a breath, I can immediately hear somebody say, don't you walk away from me. How disrespectful. We're not done with this. I'm not done talking to you yet.
Yeah.
So I don't think there is room a lot of times to take that breath because people see it as an insult.
Right. So I think you need to communicate it. Like, this is the next step, which is somebody saying something, this is going to sound real rosy and pretty, but somebody saying something like, I can see we're both heated right now, let's take a couple minutes and talk in an hour.
Right.
Right? That's sort of setting the stage, that's letting the listener know I'm not abandoning you or this conversation. I'm not saying this isn't important, I'm not saying I don't want to hear you, but we both need to calm down. But again, what I'm saying right now is very difficult to do in the moment. And even then, some people get very upset because some people are very anxious around conflict and they need it to be addressed, and they think that getting it addressed right then, right there, is going to ease their anxiety. So sometimes you might have one person who's good at this, let's say, and needs it. Some people are programmed that when there's confrontation, they want to run away, right? They like, and they go the other way. And if you have somebody on the other end of that, that's the opposite, they can get more and more triggered, right? When that person steps away. So it's about being clear what you're doing. If it's in a situation that's not a family where you can sit down beforehand. If it's in an office or if it's with a friend, you may just say, hey, I know I'm getting upset or whatever. Let's take some time apart and we'll come back and talk in an hour or whatever. When you're at home, and when I've done work with couples or just individuals around other people, relationships with others, I always tell them to have a conversation about this before it happens. Like a sit down with X person and say, hey, I noticed we're getting into conflict. I wanted to try this, so next time I see it happening, I'm going to do this.
Oh, so you're like laying the groundwork.
You're laying the groundwork, the framework. That's part of the biggest problem in communication is that people don't ask for what they need, number one, and number two, don't sort of explain where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing, I guess.
Right. And I agree with everything you're saying. And I know I've touched on this before in different episodes we've had, but, you know, a lot of what I do is, I mean, in a really general sense, teach people how to have better conversations, you know, and part of that is both sides of the conversation arriving with best intentions. You know, arriving with, I want to have a conversation about something. I want to get something out of this. I want to have a level-headed discussion and not like devolve into stuff. I want to agree on a base reality that we both share. And I feel like right now, a lot of times that doesn't happen. I feel like one or both people are coming to the conversation with a weird idea about what's happening, or not all the information, or wrong information that they think is right, or, you know, so one person has to arrive as the adult, for lack of a better word, you know, and I feel like it's hard to do that. It's hard to fill that role, but I think if at least, you know, barring everything else, if at least one person can arrive to the conversation level-headed, being able to say, you know what, I think this is getting into some weird territory, or I feel like we're getting a little too heated, you know. It's let's take 5 minutes, let's get a drink of water, take a walk,
Sure.
you know, relax. I think if somebody's there to be that level voice of reason, it helps. I wish both people were that, because that's like the gold standard, but at least one person has to be that person that says, you know, and open themselves up. This is another part of it. Open themselves up to say, you know what, I hear what you're saying. I can see your point of view. I understand the points you're making. You're making a valid observation. You know, those kind of things are hard to say, because sometimes we feel like I'm giving up power, or I'm giving up my position in the conversation if I agree with somebody, or like, oh, you know what, I may be wrong about that. A lot of people can't do that.
No.
And that's where things, I think, go off the rail a lot of times, where if you're holding on to your point of view so hard that you can't hear anything else, that's not a conversation anymore.
Right. You want to be right. You want to win.
Right.
And if you're having a conversation because you want to prove that you're right, you're not listening, probably, because you're gunning up for your person to stop talking so you can then do your whole stance, right? You're not listening, and most of the time, well, sometimes there's difficult conversations that have to be about something that could be one way or another way, or right or wrong, right? But I think a lot of times when you really like chip it away, it's not even about right or wrong. It's really, maybe it's about two different perspectives, different feelings about it, but we get caught up in what I call the noise. This is what I say to my clients. I'm like, all that, but she always does this, and I've talked to them about this, and they're doing this, and they're like the surface thing that you're arguing about or having a problem about is 90% of the time, if not more, not even about that.
Yep.
So you're getting caught up on what I call the noise, and the noise sometimes distracts us from getting to the real thing. The other thing I want to say, because I have lots of things I could go on here.
Please.
Is when I say this whole thing, and when we both do really, but about taking a step away and a moment to regroup and calm down, that does not give all the people that like to avoid difficult conversations a pass to run away. That's not what that is. I want to make sure I'm clear on that. That might be comfortable for you because you're like, confrontation, difficult conversation. But the part that I emphasize is that's not always the harder part for some that want to avoid it anyway. The hard part can be about going back to your corner, I'll call it. I hate to do it that way, and calming down and figuring out what you're feeling and what you're thinking, and then going back at the right time. And one person might be better at leading that, like you said, but both parties need to be calm, I think, in order to later have a more effective conversation.
Yeah, and going, you said a couple really great things. Number one, listening when you're in a conversation is not just waiting for your turn to talk. They will put this on my gravestone because I say this all the time. Active listening, really good, deep listening when you're in a conversation, is listening to what the person's saying and noticing when your ears prick up, or your brain says, oh, that was interesting. That means that's something for you to respond to, have a question about, follow up on. That's active listening. Is not, and not only listening to the words the stuff the person's using, but how do they look like they feel? What is their face saying? What is their body doing? You know, there's all this stuff we can quote unquote listen to as somebody's speaking. And if you find yourself when you're in conversations just waiting for your turn to talk, you're not really having a conversation. You're just waiting for your turn to talk. That's one thing. And then the other thing you said is that it's never about that thing. Again, all my classes comes up a lot because it's a human nature to do this. It's not about the drapes. That's what I tell my classes.
We have used that reference.
That's what I tell my students. It's not about the drapes, because they're in a scene, they're doing a scene, going great, and then all of a sudden they're talking about this weird thing that's outside of their relationship, and I have to stop them and I say, what are you doing? What do you mean, what am I doing? What are you talking about the drapes for all the time? Well, it's a bit funny, or no. It's not about the drapes. What is this really about? And then when I reset them and recalibrate them to not stop talking about stuff that's extraneous to the relationship, then they have a really good scene afterwards, and they're like, oh my god, you're right, because on some weird like human level, having those conversations with somebody, it opens up access to ourselves that we tend to close off. Like having a really good conversation with somebody is opening yourself up to them, making a connection. And it's easier just to talk about other things because it's deflecting.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say something. Every week.
Losing our train of thoughts. Yes. Kristin Wood.
Old moments with Kristin, we call it. Yeah, I think if you're talking about relationships and more emotional, difficult conversations, because there's work and those types, and then there's more personal, intimate relationships. I think sometimes too what happens is if the one person says something that triggers the other one, like if they say, I don't know, it could be anything. They say something like, well, she's always nagging me about this, and this, and then, and then that sets something off for that other person. I've watched this happen in couples work. And you see the face, and then you see the other person just sort of shuts down. Because now they've gone off onto something else because what that person said triggered a whole bunch of other stuff, right? And they can't hear them now.
Right.
Because now, and it's usually historically lots of history behind why that statement shut them down. Even when someone's being honest and just sharing their feelings, if that sets the other person off into a defensive space, then they no longer can hear them. So they may be quiet, but they're shut down. They're shut off. I'll see them looking over here. They're not listening at all.
Yep. That's the other thing. That's the other great point you made. I forgot about. I tend to avoid in scene work, and I tell my students to do this too. I tend to avoid using the words like always. You always do this. It's always like this. Excuse me. It's always like, I forget, there's a term for that word and I can't think of it right now.
Senior moment with Ralph.
Yeah, no, right? It'll come to me. I'll be asleep at 4 a.m. and I'll bolt upright. Dan will be like, what are you talking about? But I try to avoid words like that because it's more of a tacky than it is conversation-y. Because, you always do this when we're trying to talk. You always say this thing. You're right. I immediately shut down because you're attacking me. Instead of saying, this is how I feel. Like sometimes I feel like I'm not being heard because this will happen during a conversation. That makes more sense.
It's an I statement, which is what I was going to bring up.
I statements.
Yeah, here's your therapeutic jargon. Yeah, it's telling the person how you feel. Now that can be connected to I feel ignored. Is that what you said? Or what was the example you were using?
Attacked.
I feel attacked when you criticize my cooking. I don't know, just making something up. You're still connecting it to that person, so there is still, you're saying I don't like this that you do. But when you say you always, or you are such a, or whatever, you are calling the person that, right? Instead of focusing more on the behavior as the problem. The person is likely someone you care about, or you wouldn't be in the situation in the first place of trying to have the conversation. The person you care about, it's the behavior that you don't like. And so when you avoid saying the you as much as possible and focusing more on the I feel and this is how it makes me feel, or the way you did it, when you talk about my cooking, I often feel very attacked. So versus you are always criticizing me for my cooking. So it's sounds silly and small, but it's harder for someone to react aggressively this way, the first way that I feel when you, and that's often, people can't argue with feelings as easily as they can with criticisms, and criticizing and attacking is going to set somebody up into a defensive, reactionary mode, right?
Well, that's also the thing. If you say to me, you always do this, I can easily say, no, I don't. right? I can shut
Right, you
that
can't
down.
do that with
But I can,
feelings.
if you say, I feel like I'm being attacked when you say this, I can't say no you don't, because then that's a whole different
Can't
can of
argue
words.
with the feeling.
Can't argue with the feeling,
Good
especially
luck.
if it's your own
Yeah,
feeling.
you can't
right?
argue with your own feeling or anyone else's feeling.
And also another thing that I do with scene work is something you said. You have to like each other for some reason for this to be happening, and to have this conversation. Same thing when people are in scenes. Like, a lot of times it's just like a huge argument from the beginning, and I'm like, hold up, folks. You like each other. You're here for a reason. You're having this conversation for a reason. If you didn't like each other and you didn't want to be in the same room, guess what? You wouldn't be in the same room. We wouldn't be watching you have this scene. So obviously you care about each other in some way, or like each other. Start with that as a baseline for this, like each other. You can disagree about the situation you're in. You can disagree about how somebody's handled something or how you feel about the way they're doing something, but like each other in some way. It's like it facilitates a better, longer conversation rather than just screaming at each other because you always do this,
Yeah, I really think what people get caught up in is when they don't feel heard and when they want to be right. People want to get across how they feel, and you can get across how you feel, but you can also listen to how the other person feels. And if you can understand why someone's doing what they're doing, sometimes, and with a lot of work, sometimes needing a therapist, you can get to a point where you can empathize a little bit.
Right.
For instance, if we're talking about couples work, so I'm going to have to go off of what I do.
Please.
And you have a partner that is not talking about their feelings, and the other person is very frustrated with this and feels very disconnected, feels like the person doesn't care, feels like whatever, etc., etc. Then, so that person's got a lot of, the other person that's complaining about this is got a lot of feelings around it, right? It's really negatively affecting the relationship. The person who's not expressing themselves probably knows this, might even feel bad about it. But sometimes if you can listen and understand why, and usually this is deep-seated stuff that comes from like way back, very uncomfortable with emotion, wasn't modeled how to communicate, feels very uncomfortable talking about emotion. If you're able to get to a place where you can hear all of that, and this is a lot of what I'm talking about is therapy, but take this and adapt it however you want, and you can really understand where that person's coming from, then you may feel a little bit of empathy over time as to why it's not happening, and you may take it less personally.
Right.
Because sometimes people just aren't able, or people are afraid for whatever reason to talk about X. And then the other person creates a whole other narrative about how they don't care about them or whatever the case may be. And then if you're really able to sit down and talk about it and understand it, you can say, oh, so it's not just because they don't care. It's not just because I'm not important. It's because they struggle to do this. This is something that is comfortable as I am, and I'm giving the example of talking about emotion. It is like the polar opposite for the other one.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great intro into knowing your conversation style. How do you arrive to a conversation, and how does the other person you're talking to arrive to a conversation? When I was seeing my latest therapist before he discharged me.
No, I'm kidding.
No, it wasn't you. Unfortunately, it was not you.
I'm kidding.
Before I graduated and he discharged me, he said, "There's nothing wrong with you. Get out." They came up about how I communicate with Dan, and he said, "Well, how does Dan communicate?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Because I never thought about it before. And he's like, "How does Dan communicate? How does he like to tell his stories, get his point across? Is he a big storyteller? Does he use very few words? Is he very standoffish? Does he, And I never thought about it like that before. And I was like, oh my God, that's a great point. If you can notice how the person you're talking to, like you're talking about relationship stuff, so I think just to use that as an example, how does your partner arrive to the conversation? Are they most comfortable using very few words? Are they most comfortable telling a huge story about how they feel with every detail? Like, do they like talking at certain times? Do they like talking over dinner? Do they like, it's little things like that. If you can realize, oh, that's how they're most comfortable. It's like it can give you a little insight into how their brain works, but also how can I more effectively communicate with them, knowing how they arrive to the conversation.
People often think everyone should be like them.
Sure.
If you think about love languages, and for those of you out there listening that do not know what I'm talking about, you can Google it, and I advise everyone to Google and or read Gary Chapman's The 5 Love Languages, especially if you're in a relationship. But it's basically the way that you feel loved, whether it be words or someone doing something for you, etc. I think it's the same thing when it comes to what you're talking about. For someone like myself, I'm a big feelings ball, and I have no problem talking about emotions and feelings. I have found myself in more situations than I'd like with people that cannot do that, and I feel very frustrated. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, it's so easy. Just say how you feel. Just say how you feel. And going into it like that, expecting somebody to be like you, even though they're not, in your brain but then you get caught in these dynamics with them where they won't tell me how they feel, they don't care about me, they whatever, and we start creating all these narratives, and then maybe they say a little bit, well, that's not very much, or that, what else? We don't see that somebody that has trouble connecting with emotions saying, it's hard for me to talk about this, is them pushing past what they're comfortable with, is them being vulnerable, but somebody on the receiving end that's much more comfortable with, well, that doesn't tell me anything, and that's not helpful, and you don't care, and you know what I mean? It's hard sometimes for us to take a step back, and like you just said, recognizing who the person is in general, in addition to their communication style. In my example, I'm comfortable as hell sitting there having a chat about feelings. As comfortable as I am, somebody like who I just described is that uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Not talking about feelings and keeping it moving, they're comfortable. Not talking about feelings, keep it moving, I'm uncomfortable. So if that's even a work in a friendship or a romantic relationship or whatever it is, you've got to be able to take a step back. And even though logically you might know this, we still do it all the time. And remember and try to be patient with understanding how that other person operates, and how do you come to a common ground where you can hopefully make this work for one another.
Yeah, and it's nice when you can say, hey, I'm noticing this is difficult for you, or I noticed that you're starting to clam up, what's going on, just that little bit of, that's active listening right there. That's saying, oh wow, I'm not just waiting for my turn to talk. I've noticed that something happened where this person is starting to shut down. Hey, do we need to take a break? I noticed that you're getting uncomfortable, you're shutting down a little bit. I don't want this to be uncomfortable. Like, do we, that's another avenue of communication to use with somebody too. Like, hey, I'm noticing this about you. I care about you. I want, and in a business, it's not just about relationships either, which is totally great to talk about, but like in a business sense too, or just, friend, whatever, all this is applicable as well. Noticing at work, like, oh, my coworker communicates like this, or they prefer email, or they prefer using, they prefer meetings instead of phone call, meeting face-to-face instead of phone calls, or they're fine with Zoom, or they prefer a short email just to let them know what's going on. Noticing that about other people and then being able to communicate with them like that goes a long way to team cohesion and better outcomes at work and better communication skills and it's all comes down to being able to take a step back, take a breath, and listen. And listening is not just with your ears, it's with your eyes and your face and your heart.
And your nose, maybe.
Your nose sometimes.
I don't know, I felt like we should include it.
All 7 senses, whatever they are. But also,
now you rub me nose.
I know, right? Now
talking about it.
Also, you mentioned about wanting to be right, and I think that's like the downfall of a lot of this is people just want to be right. But now, as the words are leaving my mouth, I also want to look behind it and say, maybe a lot of it is people just want to be heard.
I think it is.
Right?
I think it is.
I think a lot of this we're talking about when we have difficult conversations that don't need to be difficult, it is just people, like if it does go off the rails, I think a lot of times it might just be that person wasn't feeling heard.
I think you're right. I think that's a huge part of it is wanting to get their point across, and then sometimes when they want to be heard and to possibly validated for how they feel, that can sometimes shut down the listening part.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking about what you said about the work piece. I was thinking about, this was probably, I think I stopped working there in 2012ish, so how many years ago that was, 10. I worked for a doctor, and everyone can tell already, and I talk a lot, and I use a lot of words, and there's a lot coming out of my mouth at one time. And I would go to the doctor, who I love this man to pieces, and he's kind of more quiet, more reserved, and I don't know if it's a doctor thing or what, but I would just start talking. I'd be like, I'm blah, 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 and I could see his face, but I also needed outside help to realize that my communication style did not work for him. Maybe it's a doctor thing, like I said, too. But he just wanted to know the bullets. What are the points? All this other fluff and how you feel about it. Mm-hmm. Not that he didn't care, he was a jerk. Just like he got lost in that and just wanted to get the bullets. And it was the same with my emails to him. I had to learn. It was a very big teaching moment for me. And I had to learn how to communicate with him. And it was a lesson also, I guess, especially being social workers, and I think a lot of us talk a lot, not all, but, and being very feelings-ish, and that wasn't, that he didn't care, but he wanted to get through all that and get to the, I hadn't really been taught that sometimes with different people and different professions and different personalities, you have to learn and figure out what's the most effective way to talk to them. And it was, I don't know, I just thought about it. I actually never realized what a teaching moment that was for me, but it kind of really was. Mm-hmm. So I was just like going along, babbling along before that. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, with the doctor, I have to think it through. I have to go in with the do. Not to mention, he was an extremely busy man, as many doctors are, and didn't have time to listen to all my emotional stuff all the time about how I felt about what didn't happen with this patient or whatever, Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that I'm the type of person when I go out and hang out with people, more often than not, people feel very comfortable around me to like open up about things and like have conversations.
It's your kind face.
It's right.
Oh,
it's the put 'em,
so approachable. Right?
But a lot of times people say, you know what, I've never told anybody this before, but I'm like, oh God, all right. And I just am that person, and that's fine. But a lot of times it's up to me to say, hey, I want to go somewhere else or do something else. And there's a nice way to kind of end that or like steer the conversation in another way. But I think it's a great point. It's on both people, not just the talker, but the listener to say, hey, I just need the bullet points, or like, hey, I'm just here for a cocktail.
Right.
Don't want to hear about your kids.
Yeah, I was doing that in this text group I was in, as people were putting so much detail, and I was like, can we just get to the point? I don't, not to be a jerk, I don't care about all that, but like, can we just get to the point of what we're on this group text about?
Right.
I'm not normally like that, but group text can be a lot sometimes. It can get overwhelming. Oh, gosh. So that's a side note.
It's being able to get a feel for the space you're in and the group you're in, and noticing, oh, yes, this is a place to tell those longer stories. It seems like people are sharing more information. Great. Mm-hmm. Or if it's like, nope, everybody just wants the bullet points. What time do I have to be there? What am I wearing? Great. Awesome. Let's do this. There's different situations that require different communication styles and skills. And again, it just comes back to taking a breath and saying, okay, what is this space all about? What is this conversation about? Is this a let's share our feeling conversation, or is this a just give me the bullet points and we're good to go?
Or should this be a conversation or not? I mean, one of the things that I try to pay attention to is like everyone doesn't want to chit chat with Kristin. Like it happened.
Who are these people?
It happened in my lift today, and I think I do it a lot unconsciously. I'm sure I miss it at times to drive people crazy, but I don't always chat with the Lyft driver. But I got in today, and I think I was feeling like I wanted to chat a little. I don't know, but I got in, and I was just like, "Oh, how are you today?" You know, that's normal. And he was like, "Fine" or whatever. And then I was like, "Oh, I really like your car." Sometimes I check out cars when I'm in lifts because it's like, "Oh, this is a chance to get another car." Not that I'm in the market, but you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, this is a really nice car. Do you like it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I like it." And then I was like, "Okay, let's stop talking." That was like, to me, he answered and he was very polite, but it was not like he
wasn't right.
Right. And I was like, "Okay." And that was perfectly fine. But I think, you know, I could easily just keep talking if I didn't pay attention, but I try not to, want to be that person. It's like being on a plane with somebody, right? And yet people complain about having that person that won't shut up next to them. I don't want to be that person. So sometimes I'll just be a little friendly or read the body language and I'll gauge it. And then if there's a natural flow, we have a conversation. If there's not, then you read your book and shut up.
There's also a cultural aspect to this too that I think it's important to mention, because you're talking about travel and airplanes and everything. Like, we come into contact with people who don't share our backgrounds or were raised as we were, and I have to remind myself of this too, is like, especially with Americans, just because we have a very America-centric view of the world. Not everybody's American. Not everybody's raised to like smile and wave and chit chat. It's a very American thing to do that.
Yeah.
A lot of countries don't do that. A lot of cultures don't do that. And is it impossible then to have a conversation with somebody who's not part of your culture? Absolutely not. You can. It's just, again, reading the space and saying, oh, okay, this seems like this person is communicating this type of way. Great. I can adjust accordingly. And you will usually find in time a kind of equilibrium where you find the space where you're both comfortable, and then things start flowing a little better. But it takes somebody, again, to be that, I don't want to keep saying adult in the room, but it takes that person being a little bit more level-headed and kind of like the voice of reason, to take a breath and say, what's the best way to continue this conversation, if at all, like you said.
No, that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. That culturally, there's so many. We could do a whole other episode on that. Not that I'm privy or knowledgeable in all the different cultural communication styles, but it's another piece to throw in there that I think is important. That sometimes we might think we know what we're doing. I'm sure I have. And there's a whole other cultural piece to it that we're not privy to. And keeping that in mind before we jump off and say someone's rude or someone's this or someone's that. There could be a lot of different reasons why somebody doesn't respond the way you want them to. Right.
And what keeps coming into my brain is like, what we're saying is not going to work for every conversation, because there are tough conversations out there that are just tough in general. I keep coming back to kids coming out to their parents, or like talking about big life changes within families or within friend groups. Those are just tough conversations no matter what. And I think everybody coming in with best intentions and trying to actively listen to each other to get the best outcome. What we're saying is not going to work in every conversation, but I think the main points apply across the board. I just wanted to throw that out there, because I know I can hear listeners being like, well, you can't do this all the time.
Well, nothing we're saying works all the time. I mean, we're just noting some important things that we're so knowledgeable about.
Right. And also, the thing about being right, having to be right all the time, I know I put it into not being heard, but a lot of, we're not right all the time. We're human beings. The only thing that's right all the time is that Zoltar from Big, where he made the wish. That's the only thing that's right all the time.
He's right.
Is that box with Zoltan, the fortune teller.
I love how you brought him in. Thank God I remembered that.
That's the only thing that's right. Everything else, we're human beings. We're going to be wrong. Probably most of the time. But you know what? That's the way, that's how we learn and grow. That's the whole point of, and I go back to teaching my class, but sometimes I have to remind people, this is why we take class. This is why we have practices every week. This is your space to make mistakes. This is your space to try stuff out, and then we talk about it. Why it worked, why it didn't work, what we can do better, That's how humans learn. We get it wrong, and we trip and fall on our face, but we get back up and say, hey, I'm not doing that again. Look how that turned out, So it's okay to be wrong. Nobody's right all the time, and if your ego or hubris won't let you be wrong, then that's a you problem, and you gotta look within yourself and figure that stuff out, because that's an issue.
That's another issue.
That's a whole other issue.
And I think when it comes to your feelings, they're not right or wrong, they just are.
Yes.
And your feelings aren't necessarily more important than the other person's feelings.
Right.
But I think that sounds very simple, but we don't do it.
That's the other thing. A lot of this stuff is simple. It's
simple in writing. It's simple in theory or whatever the word is. But actually doing what we're talking about is not always simple.
The messiest thing in the universe, I think, is human emotions. They gum up the works constantly, and being able to measure them, put them aside, notice them, shelve them, whatever counseling tool you would like to use to address put them in a box. I've heard a ton of them.
Oh yeah.
Fancy box, by the way, with a nice lid. That's how I picture it.
I'm not staying in there forever.
Right. Oh, right. But also knowing, human emotions are a B word. They're
feelings ball,
right? And knowing that they're messy, they're always going to be messy, but being able to in some way put them aside and say, you know what, I'm going to try to be as logical and wisdom minded as I can be in this conversation goes a long way.
I love that. I feel like this is another topic I feel like we could literally talk about.
Oh my God,
hours.
we could go on tour with this topic.
Oh yeah, we could. Yeah, stage and everything.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That would be my dream come true.
Yeah.
But we need to stay at nice hotels.
I would want a microphone with rhinestones on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would want
and a makeup room.
A Barbara Streisand microphone when she was.
Yes.
I don't know why this popped into my head, but when she was on Oprah Winfrey's show, back in the day in the 90s or something, she came out with this white microphone. She said, sang her song, everybody was going nuts and losing their brains. And Oprah was like, after she was done, Oprah was like, is that one of my microphones? And she was like, yeah. I was like, how did you get a white one? Did you paint it? She's like, yeah, Barbara Streisand.
So Oprah's not worried about the fact that she's one of the best singers in history. Oprah's fixated on the microphone.
I would have said the same thing. Did you paint one of my microphones?
That's funny.
I don't care
That's why
who you
she's
are.
Oprah and everyone
Barbara
loves her.
Streisand.
She kept it real with Barb.
Right?
Yeah.
Barb. BRB. I think we've beat this topic into the ground.
We've given everybody a wealth of information.
Great. If you have any questions, you want to push back on anything, you want to share any tips you have about the conversation, any squirrel tips are greatly appreciated. Send them along to us. Hey, let me ask you something, all one word, @gmail.com. The links to our respective social medias are in the show notes for this episode, so check those out. Anything else you want to plug?
No, thanks everyone.
Thanks,
Enjoy your
everybody.
week.
Enjoy your week, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.